But the truth of the matter is, I've been a friend and ally of the NCLR for even a longer time. NCLR as a product of the civil rights movement of the 60s, and so am I. And Father, I see Father sitting in front of me as a practicing Catholic. I want to ask for anticipatory absolution for my passion as I speak about these subjects. I have a bad habit of saying exactly what I believe, and I'm going to say it today. So as we say in our church, bless me, Father, I hope I don't sin. Throughout the 70s, as a young senator, we stood shoulder to shoulder, NCLR and I, with great allies. We used to have great allies in those days on both sides of the aisle. Teddy Kennedy and Hubert Humphrey, Jack Javits and Ed Brooke, and many other people who were our allies. We began the long, hard work of making real the promise of the Fair Housing Act, of the Civil Rights Act. You and I, we fought side by side to pass legislation to improve the treatment of migrant farm workers. 1975, we worked together to extend the Voting Rights Act to stop states from using English-only ballots, but they're at it again in other ways. As important as those fights were, though, folks, the fight we face today is even more consequential for your community and for America, for the whole country, but especially for the Hispanic community. You, the Hispanic community, Latino community, is the fastest growing population in America. You now make up 16% of the population of the United States of America. But give yourself an applause, because your time is about to come. Political engagement matters. But there are voices among us who fear your inclusion. But that's not new in American history. There's always been a fight between the voices of inclusion and the voices of exclusion, between those pushing forward and those who continue to try to pull us back, between those appealing to our hopes and those who continue to appeal to our fears. People fear what they don't know. People fear that is different to them. In the middle of the 19th century, a wave of immigrants, Father, we Catholics fleeing the devastation of the potato famine in Ireland and other parts of Europe, encountered a similar backlash of xenophobia. The Know Nothing Party came out of nowhere with an anti-immigrant, anti-Catholic platform that in the 1850s, as a third party, gathered a disturbingly large percentage of the vote. Then, as now, it wasn't just those seeking to come who got the brunt of this xenophobia. It was those who had been here for a long time, like my Irish Catholic family, the Finnegans and the Blewitts, who arrived in the 30s. They were also caught up in the backwash of this xenophobia. No Irish allowed. No Irish need apply. The same kind of backlash. That kind of backlash is not new in American history and is not new in American politics. But then, we in America prevailed because of the better angels of the American people. But even though the stakes are higher today and more consequential and more severe today, I am still convinced we will prevail because of the better angels of the American people. And I would offer, as a concrete example, the reaction of the American people, where fully 2/3 of them stood up and supported the President's executive action lifting the threat of deportation for 800,000 children who had no choice whether to come or not. The Dreamers. The American people support the Dreamers. And I imagine even some of you are surprised by the way ordinary Americans embraced the President's action. I have faith in the American people. This is not hyperbole. I trust their heart. When they know the facts, when they know the reality, they make the right decision. And it's our job, yours and mine, to make sure they understand the facts. They understand the reality of what it's like to be Hispanic in America today, the problems that are confronted. Because when they know the reality, they will support our efforts. You know, there's a great deal at stake. Whether we'll find a path out of the shadows for those who spent decades living in the shadows, whether the attempts at voter suppression will succeed, and if it's up to Attorney General Holder, they will not succeed. Whether quality early education, the single most consequential bit of education for all Americans, but particularly for Hispanic children, will endure. Whether or not Pell Grant scholarships will be cut for nearly 2 million Hispanics who have them. Whether Hispanic families will finally be able to afford quality, not just health care, quality health care. For now, you are the most underrepresented population, underinsured population in America. So much is at stake for your community in this presidential election. Like it or not, that is a reality. Imagine, and I really mean this, close your eyes and I'm trying to be as objective as is possible as a candidate. But close your eyes and imagine what the Supreme Court will look like after 4 years of a Romney presidency. Literally, just imagine. Imagine the court with 2 more Scalias or 2 more Roberts on the court. Imagine what it will be like. Imagine what it will mean for civil rights, voting rights, and so much more that we fought so hard for so long to accomplish. Imagine a Justice Department that supports rather than challenges the continued effort to suppress the right to vote. Because, folks, that and so much more will happen if Governor Romney wins. He's not a bad man, he's a decent family man, but he has a fundamentally different view of the America I envision and the President envisions, and I think you envision, than we do. Just listen to some of the things the governor has recently said, and his allies in the Republican Congress. A Republican congresswoman compared not too long ago our effort to make sure student loan interest rates don't double. She referred to it as the stage 3 cancer of socialism. Governor Romney's saying, I was not pleased when I read about the plan to save 240,000 teachers' jobs. He was not pleased. His solution for immigration, quote, self-deportation. Pledging, quote, if I were elected and the Congress would have passed the DREAM Act, would I veto it? The answer is yes. reminding his compatriots, I believe it was in a debate, that, quote, in my state, referring to the state of Massachusetts, I had a legislature that passed a bill saying that we were going to give in-state tuition breaks to children of illegal aliens in our state, and I vetoed it, end of quote. Is unequivocal in his support of the Arizona law. Quote, I support the Arizona law. Quote, it is a model. Chiding the Supreme Court by saying when it decided the Arizona case, quote, I would have preferred to see the Supreme Court give more latitude to the states, not less. Criticizing the Justice Department for challenging voter suppression legislation, echoing his allies in the Republican House who actually passed an amendment in the House. It will not become law, but passed an amendment in the House that would prevent the Justice Department from challenging state voter suppression, would prevent the Justice Department from doing its job. If you all sit in your hands this race, it will not be because we didn't know what the world will look like 4, 6, and 8 years from now. The consequences will not just be immediate, they will be long-term. And I'm not just talking about their views. When I say they, Governor Romney and his Republican allies in the House and Senate, I'm not just talking about their views on civil rights and voting rights and immigration, about which I could say so much more that I believe are antithetical to the interest of the United States of America. It's their economic philosophy, a policy that would be absolutely devastating, not just for your community, but for my community and every community in America. The governor's response to the emotional and financial consequences of the foreclosure crisis. No state knows it better than Nevada. So many people, through no fault of their own, caught up in this crisis because 3 neighbors in their development had a subprime mortgage. They went belly up, and all of a sudden they find their house, they are upside down. They did nothing wrong. They missed no payment. These guys don't get. For middle-class folks like me and most of you, owning a home is maybe the single most consequential element of our existence, to be able to provide for our families. A home. What was his response to this financial crisis? He said, and I quote, let the market hit bottom. That may be a sound business judgment if you're running Bain Capital, but it's not a sound judgment for the United States government to be encouraging. I'm dealing with jobs that have been outsourced, costing tens of millions of jobs. And by the way, the ancillary impact of the housing crisis was the overwhelming number of Hispanics who worked in the construction industry being able to make a decent living evaporated. Just let the market bring us back. That old expression, in the long run, we'll all be dead. But talking about jobs that have been outsourced, Governor Romney said, and I quote, I believe it was when he was either in Cincinnati, Ohio, or Toledo, Ohio, I'm not sure, but I know what he said. He said, I know why jobs come and why they go. I guess he does. The Washington Post, and I'm quoting the Post, said, Romney, when he ran Bain Capital, quote, owned companies that were pioneers in the practice of shipping work from the United States overseas. When I said that in a speech not long ago, his people came back and said, well, you got to understand the difference between outsourcing and offshoring. This is a man whose idea of tax fairness is to maintain the Bush tax cuts for the very wealthy. Let me give you, as they used to say in CNN 100 years ago, a factoid. That tax cut over 10 years for just the top 2% will cost $1 trillion. $1 trillion in lost revenue. 55% of that, $500 billion of that, will go to just 120,000 households in all of America. Households with an average income of $8.4 million. I come from a state that is the highest per capita income in America, and I'm proud of it. We're proud of it. I've gotten overwhelming support with rich and poor. I'm not playing, as he said, this is not wealth envy. Wealthy people are just as patriotic as poor people, but nothing has been asked of them to get us out of this god-awful hole. But he not only wants to continue that $1 trillion directed specifically to a narrow group of Americans. On top of that, he's proposed an additional $1.6 trillion tax cut. If he didn't write it down, if they didn't say it, hard to believe. Another $1.6 trillion tax cut to people with incomes in excess of $1 million. An additional tax cut of average of $250,000 a year for the next 10 years for people whose income exceeds $1 million. You know, when we tried to get the jobs bill passed, there was a provision that said, as Antonio knows, put back to work 400,000 teachers, firefighters, teachers' aides, police officers. You know how we were going to pay for it? With 5.5% tax on the first dollar after the first $1 million you made. And the polling data that was available showed that up to 70% of the millionaires supported it. These are good people. But nothing's been asked of them. In order to pay for this hemorrhaging of tax resources to the very wealthy, he supports a budget. People say, why would he acknowledge he supports the Ryan budget? Every single congressman on the House side Republican voted for it. Why? Well, how else are you going to pay for these tax cuts? It does a lot. But let me give you a few examples of the effect on your community. It will strike 200,000 students from the new Head Start program. 200,000. 19 million poor will be taken off of Medicaid. 75% of the people in assisted living, and the one incredible thing about your community, and I'd like to think mine, is you take care of your own as long as you can possibly do it, almost under any circumstances. But 75% of the people living in assisted living are there because of Medicare and Medicaid. And 75% of them are women. What will happen to those people? As many as 8 million people will be cut from supplemental nutrition programs, many of the newly unemployed because of the god-awful circumstance we inherited from the policies of the previous 8 years. Child nutrition, school lunch programs, child care, early education, eviscerated. The impact on the lives of ordinary, hard-working, decent Americans, many of whom who got to where they are because of this god-awful recession, will be genuinely damaged. Imagine the impact those tax cuts will have on the next generation of young Hispanic children. Let me explain what I mean by that. You have a whole generation, we have a whole generation of children that are 2, 3, 4, and 5. Children about to be born, that if early education is not available to them, they will fall into the statistic, making them significantly less likely to be ever able to close the achievement gap, significantly less likely to graduate. This has a generational impact. You miss the start. It has a long tail. And this is a man who says President Barack Obama is out of touch with the needs of the American people. This coming from a man who until recently had a Swiss bank account and millions of dollars invested in the Grand Cayman Islands beyond security, beyond scrutiny. And the President Obama is out of touch? When his father was a candidate for president in 1968, his father released 12 years of tax returns because he said, and I quote, "One year could be a fluke, perhaps done for show," end of quote. That was his father. His son has released only 1 year of his tax returns, making alive the old adage, like father, like son. He wants you to show your papers, but he won't show us his. It's kind of fascinating. So many questions. Is it any wonder why the economic policies of his and his Republican friends, and this is not your father's Republican Party, this is a different deal. Is it any wonder why their economic policies are premised on a notion that the way to build this economy, the economy of this great nation, is from the top down, to maintain an environment where the powerful, where they have little risk, few rules, and virtually no accountability. They're the facts. We have a fundamentally different view. We believe the way to grow the economy, an economy that's built to last, is from the middle out, the old-fashioned way. And folks, everybody calls me middle-class Joe, and you remember they did that the day I got to the Senate, and it wasn't meant as a compliment. It was meant I'm not sophisticated. I'm just a middle-class guy. Well, I'm sophisticated enough to know that when the middle class does well, the poor have a way up, and the wealthy do very fine. Thank you, ma'am. They do very fine. And the middle class does well when they're able to own their own home, not rent it. When they're able to send their kid to a school that gives them a chance to qualify to go to school after high school. When they have the possibility of being able to help care for their parents in need, and the hope that when they retire, they won't have to rely on their children. By the way, all of you know, you have the same tradition my family does. My mother and father lived with Jill and me. My father was there in hospice. My mother, we finally talked her into living. She wouldn't come and live with us. Not because she didn't love us, but she said, Joey, our whole life you were raised, there was someone. I was raised in no Horatio Alger story, a normal story. A 3-bedroom house, split level, in a new development in the mid-50s in Delaware. 4 kids, and literally a senior adult member of my family living with us at least 15 of the years I lived at home. My mother said, and by the way, it was wonderful for children, by the way, having your grandpop live with you, having your great aunt, your uncle, for real. But those walls were awful thin. I wonder how the hell my parents did it, but that's a different story. I know you don't know anything about that. I know none of you and your families have done the same thing, understand that at all. I know that. But folks, Your parents are like mine and like all parents in America. You know why my mom would move in, even though I was financially better equipped with the help of my brothers and my sister to take care of Mom, which she did move in, thank God, 4 years. She didn't want to be a burden. She didn't want to be a burden. Do you know any of your moms or dads, when you have them move in, don't want to say, honey, I don't want, don't do this for me. Don't do that. I'm not sure these guys get us. When I say us, I mean Americans. I don't know that they get us. And maybe just have a little bit of money once in a while, you could go on a vacation or do something special. That's middle class. And to be able to dream. Be able to dream that your child can be anything they aspire to. My mother, I got in trouble for saying this 5, 6 months ago. I said, what I resent most about listening to these other guys talk, they act like we don't aspire to great things. My mother never had a doubt in her life, nor my father, that I could be president of the United States or vice president or anything I wanted to be. They never doubted my brother could be a billionaire or a millionaire. No, I didn't think billion in those days, a millionaire if he went into business. My sister, who was smarter than all of us, could do anything she wanted. No one doubted that. No one doubted that. But you have to have a platform. You have to at least be able to get to the place where you can see the possibility of the dream. Folks, I honestly, God, believe this is a fight for the heart and soul of America. Oh, we will survive no matter who wins. I'm not suggesting that. But it's what are we made of? Where is our soul? Where is our heart? This election is going to determine the kind of country we're going to leave for our children for at least the better part of this next generation. And as the President said, it's a make or break moment for the middle class. The entire middle class has been decimated. Folks, too many hard-working, God-fearing, decent Americans, through no fault of their own, have had to make what I call the longest walk. And that's up a short flight of stairs to your child's bedroom or down the hall to their bedroom to say, honey, I am so sorry. I lost my job. Mommy lost her job. Or the bank says we can't live here anymore. I don't have enough money, honey. I'm so sorry. You can't go back to St. Agnes's. You can't go to Roosevelt High School. You can't play in that Little League team next year. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. My dad made that walk from Scranton, Pennsylvania when I was in 3rd grade. I remember it vividly. I remember coming up my grandpa Finnegan's stairs because that's where we were living. He had a job, but it wasn't enough. I remember sitting at the edge of the bed and saying, Joey, I'm going to have to move. He didn't say we're going to have to move. He said, I'm going to have to move. I said, what in God's name does that mean? I remember it. It wasn't traumatic, but I remember it. And he said, I'm going to go down to Wilmington with Uncle Frank. There's jobs down there. It's only, and I remember this, only 157 miles. And I'll try to come home every weekend. And when I get enough, I'll bring you and Mom and Val and Jimmy down, and we'll have a nice place, a nice life. Wasn't until I got to be in my late 20s, Gov, and you met my father as a proud, decent man, an elegant man. Actually, the longer walk I realized for him was walking into my grandfather Ambrose Finnegan's pantry in front of my mother's brothers and saying, Ambrose, can you do me a favor? Can you keep Jean and the kids? It'll be about a year. But I promise I'll pay you back. promise I'll make good. So many people have had to make that walk because of the god-awful policies that generated the greatest recession in the history of America short of a depression. But so many of your parents made more than a walk. They made a journey. They made a journey. A journey from all that they knew, all that they cherished, because of the promise of this great land, because of the opportunity that would afford it them, but most of all because of you, because of their children. It's a journey that has been repeated over the last 236 years of the history of this great nation. It is a journey that has revitalized generation after generation this great, great land of ours that we call the United States. Ladies and gentlemen, don't miss this. This is your moment. This is the moment for your community. Your population is too talented, too capable, too grounded, too proud, and too patriotic. More than 1.3 million Hispanics have served in our armed forces. More than 637 have died. More than 2,789 have been wounded. Don't tell me you're not ready. It's much, much, much too important for you to remain silent. We need your help, and we need it now. God bless you all, and may God protect our troops.